All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Yes, we're late. I was not feeling good yesterday, so I took things and they knocked me out.
I just noticed we're both wearing baseball shirts, even though we should be getting geared up for football season because tonight is the first preseason
Oh,
games.
you're not excited about the epic troll the Mets did of Texas?
Yeah, we got our guy we could have re-signed last year back, minus a first round pick, and then
Yeah,
a massive contract, and then with the Rangers got the other good.
Scherzer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was interesting because we could have just re-signed him last year.
That was my first thought of wait a minute.
In fact, I think he would
So
have
why
stayed for
now?
less.
Yeah, why now? What's going on here?
We were having some serious pitching depth woes, so we needed all the help we could get. And I think they didn't think that far ahead. They were playing Moneyball, and it didn't work out, and so they had to bite the bullet and suck it up. Which I guess it's kind of like admitting a mistake at that point, but too late, too sorry for playing the Moneyball. That's what
Yep.
admin and bureaucracy does for you. Though there is a place for it because Moneyball does work. You just can't miss.
hmm Well, it's how the Athletics stayed competitive when they're a something of a. It seems odd to say because they're in the Bay Area, but Oakland is effectively a small market team
Mm-hmm.
because of the amount of money they bring in, the amount of revenue and fan base they have.
Well, aren't the Orioles doing well right now? I
Uh,
someone made the comment that
yeah,
Houston Jr. is doing well because they moneyballed us when we bought a championship last year. Basically bolstering our ranks with good players, and they got all the prospects out of it, and now they're playing well.
yeah. It doesn't help that for some reason both last time I looked, both Boston and New York were at the bottom of that division for some inexplicable reason. So that helps Baltimore out. The city
New
not being on
York is
fire probably helps too.
well, New York is one of those teams that they're okay with tanking every once in a while because they have such a base, and all
hmm
they have to do is buy a championship every few years, and
Keeps
uh,
everyone basically
yeah,
happy.
yeah, winning keeps your fans, but you don't have to win every year. And Houston's learning that because they're playing well right now, but they were on a slump for a while, and you could tell it was, well, we just won the championship last year, so we can kind of coast for a year or two and then spend some money. Is every few years keep the fans back in it. And I hate when people say fair weather fans. Every team has fair weather fans. Every
Yeah.
team has fans that come out when you're winning, and every team has fans that stick around the whole time. I mean, look at the Browns; they still sell seats, and
Well, yeah.
and
All
as a,
right.
as a Houston fan, we need the Browns to do bad because our first round pick next year is the Browns pick. So,
Well, luckily for you, they're the Browns.
well, we'll see what happens with Deshaun. We've proven as the Texans that you can still go 4-12 with Deshaun as your quarterback. So the Browns could possibly do the same thing.
Should get interesting. All right.
All right. So
Well,
what are we talking about today, Heatho? Since you brought me the subject.
yeah. So when I was driving up to Oklahoma last week, I was listening to Steve Day Show podcast, and they had an episode that was they've done this before with Trump and DeSantis, and I don't know that they've done it for Vivek. And so last week they did one for RFK Jr., which was 12 questions the candidate needs to answer. And uh, the the questions were sent in by a viewer, but then they, curated them and added their own analysis. And I thought this would be interesting. One, because I was a little disappointed that they didn't put more of their resources into um uh high, highlighting where he had actually answered these.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
so
because that was what confused me when you sent me the questions because I was like, this is like 8 of the 12 are answered in the town hall, and that's an hour and a half of watching, and less than that if you can do it at a 1.5 speed, which is hard to do with
mhm.
his voice. But
Yeah, so that was a little disappointing. I thought we could do better. But I also thought it would be a good um it would be a good way to talk about him more generally. By that I mean I've had this thought
Well, I
percolating in
should
my
I
head
should
for a
say
bit.
more specifically because it answers policy, not just rhetoric.
And that's where I think that's where I wanted you to take the lead and you to talk about this because you've listened to him more. And I
Mhm.
thought one of the more insightful things that we kind of, uncovered, discovered with our varied points of view is the last time we talked about him. And I was disappointed in his answer with Peterson, specifically
Mhm.
the question of when does the left go too far? Because that's an important question.
And
That's
that's
an
not one
important
of the
question for
12, so
both
let's
sides.
end with that one.
Yeah.
Because in his talk with Marr, he did kind of answer that, but it was asked completely differently.
Yes.
It was from a standpoint of these are the things we have in common as true liberals, and how do we push that forward in spite of the movement that's going on, which is way too far to the left. And so that he did answer a little better there because
Mhm.
it wasn't how are they bad, it was how are we good.
Yeah.
And
So a more positive spin on it.
mhm,
But also I think there's as you kind of pointed out, not using these words last time we were talking about it, is there's kind of a Jonathan Haidt thing going on here too, which is simply that I don't think RFK fully understood the question. Not that, he's a dummy, he didn't understand the question. He's not coming from the same direction that Peterson is.
mhm.
So Peterson's framing of the idea was different than the way RFK would look at it, because as you pointed out, RFK basically did answer the question later in that Peterson interview in a completely different way.
Well, and it's again, the asking is key because there's a psychological thing going on here. RFK is still trying to pull people from that pool.
Hmm.
There are a lot of people that are following along with a false pretense. But if you tell them straight out, you're doing this wrong thing, they're going to double down.
Yeah.
And so he's
Yeah.
trying to pull the people that aren't too far gone from that pool as well. So
Yes.
it's he is. I mean, I don't think anything's on accident here. I do think he gets a little defensive at times, but I don't think there's anything on accident here. I think he's really trying to maximize his reach, which is part of his answer with Mar, which is really important. So let's end with that one because that's a really uh,
All right.
a
Well,
good
then
one to
let's.
end on. And also let's end with after that, let's end with DeSantis because I have a theory on where he's going. His bid for the nomination is going south, and it has to do with Trump, and probably not in the way a lot of people are thinking.
Oh,
It has to do with Sam
find that
Harris.
intriguing.
So he's fallen into a trap, and I want to kind of spell that out a little bit and see where that takes us. All right, so the first one, let me share the screen here so everybody gets a visual as well as the verbal. First question is, what would you do to secure the border? This is you being RFK. Well, he answered this one pretty extensively in because he was asked this exact question in the town hall, and he talked about the wall in a way that was kind of a precision engineering of the wall. We need the wall in these high traffic areas. And in all that space in between, we have technology for that. There are movement sensors, all of these other things that have been used in the past successfully, but they scratched when they did the open border policy. And he said, we have tech to do that. We don't need to do this big expansive thing. We can actually catch the people on the way in. So not only stopping the trafficking, but catch the traffickers. The wall just stops the trafficking. It doesn't catch the traffickers. So
Hmm.
he said his idea about this is a multifaceted thing to not only deter and prevent trafficking and just coming across the border, but also something that anybody who watched The Sound of Freedom should agree with: catch the people who are involved with it, because that's
Yeah.
we have to cut off the heads of the snake.
Because when you start putting the screws to those people, when you
Mhm.
start investigating, then that will theoretically, hopefully, unfold those networks. So you're not just taking down one person, but you're taking down the networks. I this was something relatively new to me because I hadn't realized until they were talking about it that relatively recently when they did this show last week that he had been down to the border and put out some
Mhm.
videos on the border. And this is a place. So I like the way Dace put this. What was the reason the right is asking this question is because too many on the left throw up their hands and wail about fairness. And so they don't want to do anything about the border because that's viewed optically as mean and unfair. And because it ain't white people coming across the border, at least on the southern side, it's racist.
Mhm.
Okay, well, you've got to do something about it. And so the way Dace put it that I liked was you've got a supply problem and you've got a demand problem. The supply problem is the influx of illegals coming across the border. So you can do something about that to stymie the supply, or you can do something about the demand by being more harsh with businesses that are hiring without bothering to do their due diligence on
Mhm.
verification, with actually deporting people instead of saying, all right, you've got a hearing, an immigration hearing in 8 months, see you then, and they just disappear and nobody bothers to go look for them. You've
Yeah,
got to
and
give
that
me
that
one or the other.
that's a tough one because you're wondering where the onus lands. Because if I'm running like a construction business and I
Mhm.
need just laborers, unskilled labor, I know I can go just down to the local Home Depot and find that with these
Yep,
undocumented workers trying to find labor. But also, okay, so you can go after the guy who wants the unskilled labor, or you can take that same manpower and just go to the Home Depot yourself and create a deterrent for this activity to even happen. And it's, I mean, everybody's going to find a way around the system, even with the sensors and the technology, but make them work for it.
exactly.
Make the people that are going to get around the system work for it, and at least it limits it to some degree. You're never
Yeah,
going to stop everything.
the
You're
point of game theory isn't that, you know,
you create
when I
you
hear it
create a game that's hard to cheat is what you do.
exactly,
Yeah.
that's either difficult to cheat or benefits the most people the most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's a simple game, then the most people can get the most out of it.
Well, and you know what that also opens up? If I'm a young legal immigrant that needs a job, a day job here and there, I can go down there and you can come show up and guess what? I'm legal. I got a card. I got an ID. I got a driver's license or whatever it is that identifies me.
This is where I think RFK's background could really help him. And maybe you have heard him talk about this, and this will come up again here later in the question about gun control,
Mm-hmm.
is something that got lost in Trump's rhetoric about the wall and making Mexico pay for it was uh how many laws are on the books already that are just ignored?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are plenty of laws already that say if you come in illegally, or if you are using a fraudulent green card, or if you overstay your green card, there are already penalties on the books. You are sent back to your country of origin and you cannot apply again for a certain number of time. And depending on how egregious the infraction, that extends the length of time that you are not allowed to reapply again. And if you are caught illegally again, that extends that up to a lifetime ban.
Well, this is
Simply
one
enforce those
area. Yeah,
laws.
this is one area to piggyback on that where I thought it was actually one of his strongest policies is the interviewer at the town hall tried to push back on him. She tried to say, well, there's so many thousands of people clamoring to get in. It's not that they're all getting in. Da, da, da. And he looked right back at her and he said, those are the ones that are trying to come in legally. And I want to make it easier for people to come in legally, but I can't do that until we stop the illegal
Yeah.
immigration.
There are
And
the
so,
tens of thousands of
yeah.
people, literally in a line, tens of thousands of people long. And
Mhm.
then there are the tens of thousands that are just rushing the border and
Yeah.
trying to overwhelm border
So
security
here's a great
authorities.
analogy. Then, and this is out of my own head and something that it's one of my pet peeves while driving. If you're on an exit that's a lane exit and there's a line of people trying to exit, But then there's the people shooting to the front and pushing their way in. And it just makes
Right. Oh, don't touch your
hello,
thingy.
hello, 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 hello.
There, you're back.
Hi, hello.
Yep. There you are.
Okay. Am I really? Okay, there I am.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. But if you're doing the right thing and you zipper it in when you were supposed to, your time in that line is extended by umpteen amount, and you just see those people coming in. And I'm with the everybody should band together and get this far from each other, keep those people from getting, because if you find out too late you need to get in, guess what? There's another exit, turn around, come back. That's your fault.
Mhm.
And that's what's happening, is basically people are muscling in the front when they didn't do the right thing to get in, and it's extending the time for the people who did the right thing. So it's if you act, this is where empathy and compassion diverge. Empathy is help everyone. Well, what if you're helping the people that did it wrong? You're making it harder on the people that did it right.
And this is where I think RFK Jr. is so sympathetic, and this will come up repeatedly too, because I think about halfway through they kind of had their epiphany of who RFK Jr. was and why he is appealing to so many people on the right. He is a man outside of time. He is someone that he is the kind of opposition politician who used to exist in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
That this is someone who, from the right's point of view, he's not a bad guy, he's just wrong. And the reason he's appealing, the reason he works is because he doesn't think I'm a bad guy. He just thinks I'm wrong on some things and I'm right on some things, or I'm close to right on other things, and we can work on these things. So the reason he's appealing, let's take the border issue in particular. I've said this before and it bears repeating because it was a long time ago. Here is why the wall was such a galvanizing issue for the right, because the right has been paying attention to this. Ironically, one of the reasons we have such a horrible immigration policy is thanks to Teddy Kennedy back in the 60s, who helped push for a change in our immigration laws. And for decades, since the 60s, certainly since Reagan's compromise in the 80s, the the sales pitch has been, we're going to implement these more strict security measures, and the compromise is those people who are here now will get amnesty for their illegal activities. That's happened a couple of times, and the stricter measures never happen, because the stricter, it's like spending cuts. Yes, we've agreed to spending cuts that all happen 5 years from now. Well, 5 years from now, there's going to be two totally different Congresses, and they're not going to abide by that. The wall was a tangible, physical thing that could not be taken away by sleazy politicians down the road.
Well, and remember from episode 1 of this podcast, I agreed with the wall at the time, and I gave you the liberal perspective of why that should be, because of the compassionate, the deterrent to prevent the hard truth from happening. But now I didn't know about this other tech he was talking about. Now I'm like, whoa, okay, well, maybe I won't support the wall, but I will support a barrier which is made by this tech. Yeah.
Which is where I was going, because I agree logically that no, there's better ways to do it other than a 3,000-mile wall all along the southern border. However, the reason most people on the right say build the damn wall is because they know from years of experience you don't really mean it when you say. That's the difference with RFK. If he says we're going to do this, I know just the vagaries of politics, he might not be able to do everything he says he's going to do, but he's going to try and get as much of that as he can.
Well, and this is where defense spending comes in too, because everybody's like, oh, the industrial complex. I'm like, we could spend money. We can still be rich, but we could do it in a prevention mechanism. All of this tech has to come from somewhere. It could come from that damn military industrial complex we're so afraid of. It's just in a way that prevents people from getting hurt instead of blowing up people in Syria, right? Everybody wins. I don't understand why we're fighting the options that everybody wins. And so I think this first question, to close it out, is one where the conservative, and he's a center left person, everybody within center right or about would probably be like, that's cool, we agree on that one. which is I think a lot of policies we would, 80% of the country would say that sounds good to me.
Yeah.
And, and if somebody center right would say, well, yeah, I agree with that, but we do need more of a wall than you want. Well, now the argument is how much wall.
Mm-hmm.
The argument isn't should it be there. The argument is how
Yeah.
much.
The
It's just
art
like
the,
it's just
the
like the
argument
abortion
isn't
argument.
you're
It's
a you're an evil traitor who hates the country. No, you're an evil racist who hates brown people.
mhm.
That's not what the argument actually is. That's just what it is in media.
Okay. So number 2, what would you do about election fraud? This one was probably one of the hardest ones because I guess because he's on the blue side, he's not asked about it a lot. And so I had to kind of look back at his history and what he's talked about in the past. And he has talked about election fraud in the past.
No.
And this one can be, I piece it all together, can be best answered with his stance on corporate capture of things, because he has put the pieces together to say, look, the candidate backed by pharma has won every time. Okay, is that true? Okay, here's the numbers. Well, actually, yeah, it is. And it's no surprise Obama shook hands with the pharma industry to get Obamacare through, but yet now we have the highest drug prices in the world because they can charge us whatever they want, right? So the candidate backed by these big corporate capture systems are the ones that win every time. Well, okay, so his stance on eliminating corporate capture kind of addresses that indirectly. Now, as far as what you would think of when you hear the election squad word, uh, I haven't seen him speak specifically to that. And internet searches were not useful. Of course, Google is biased, but
Um,
also he's not willing to talk ill about his competitors. So if someone asks him about that, he might hedge the question anyways, because that would ultimately be the are you going to talk bad about Trump issue.
and this is where this is where it becomes so infuriating. And he may be asked more recently, sooner than rather than later about this, because you've already got the January 6th indictment, and there's a good chance there's going to be a Georgia indictment. And
Mm-hmm.
a big part of that is undermining elections. And I've referenced him before. Go check out Dan Bongino from the last couple of weeks, and he's had the montages of all of the time since Gore in 2000 where the Democrats have said elections were stolen.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else remember the ads of celebrities in 2020 saying, pleading with electors not to seat Trump?
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's also a Biden document that was recently gotten on a FOIA request. That was his post-election plan, and it was to contest and to solicit states to send different electors.
Yeah, and that is something that, now this is something really skeevy that Michigan has done. I was going to bring it up a while ago and I haven't, that I think is important and is another one of those where are the people who are standing against this? Because this isn't something that you just fight in the courts. The Whoever is the sheriff in this district in Michigan should frickin' arrest the Attorney General of Michigan, because the Attorney General of Michigan has filed against normal citizens who were I don't remember if they were solicited or if they were actually seated as alternate electors. That is something that has happened ever since we've had elections and the Electoral College, which is since the beginning, that you would see if there were uh allegations of misconduct, the other side would seat alternate electors and then try to get those alternates in the same way that you have alternate jurors, and one attorney or the other might try and get a particular juror kicked for one of the alternates. That has happened since we've had elections. The Michigan Attorney General actually filed suit against these people who were just minding their own business, being responsible citizens. That's oh, you're undermining the jury system because you were seated as an alternate juror. I just answered the call for jury duty. I'm
Hmm.
just doing my thing here, trying to be part of the system. So that is something I would like to hear him talk about more of, about the lawfare that is being perpetrated against people, and what he would do about that. But I think that that comes down the line in some of these other questions
Yeah,
as well.
and we're also going to, I mean, if you really think about it, it's not necessarily that specific issue with the electors, but he has been talking about the fact that the administration is not allowing for a fair election,
Hmm.
which in itself is election fraud. If you really think about it, I don't know
The
why the administration has the power to determine these things.
the Department of Justice, which is funded by the people and is led by the president, is prosecuting his main opponent. It does that not just scream, hey, maybe we should have a special counsel for all this because you are clearly getting into electioneering here? But
It's like it's like if the defending champion basketball team, their weakness was 3-point shots, and they said, you know what, this year 3 points don't count. Only dunks count.
mhm.
And by the way, we have Shaq, Olajuwon, David Robinson, and it's like we got a team stacked with centers, but we're only allowed dunks. Nothing else counts. That's what the administration is doing right now. It's like, well,
Yep.
yeah, we're not going to like say you can't do it, but you're not going to get Secret Service protection. You're not going to get any media time. We're not going to do debates, anything that would be, the normal process.
Yeah. All right. Let's moving on to the third question.
Yeah, we got
Trying
a
are we
third.
gonna are we gonna do all of these? There were 12 on the show, but I don't know if you want to do all of them or not.
I have answers for all of them. So
Okay.
yeah. What is the purpose of SCOTUS? What criteria will you use in judicial appointments? Would you pack the court? Uh, the short answer to this one is the end of that. He would not pack the court. Uh, Again, this is another one where there's not a direct answer to go by, but you have to go by everything else he's gone with. But he believes in he's a lawyer by trade. He's not a politician by trade. He's a lawyer by trade. He
Mhm.
believes in the legal process and the way it's set up right now. He thinks that's the answer to a lot of our problems now. So I can't see him packing the court to break the system, because that's the system he thinks he
Yeah.
thrives in.
Well, and I think this is illustrated in one of his answers, which I have heard him give, um, which made nobody happy, which is why I liked it, which was his answer on abortion,
Mm-hmm.
which was that, personally he thought it was a bad decision, but that's the decision. So that's the rule of law now, is that it goes back to the states. So and people on the right are, oh, I can't vote for someone who's not as pro-life as I am, and people on the left are losing their minds of, Handmaid's Tale. All he said was, hey, it's back in the hands of the state. Debate it with your fellow citizens in your state. It's no longer a federal issue.
Okay, so this one again was a vague answer, and it's not. I don't want to speak for him too much, so we'll leave it at that on that one, because he never said he wouldn't pack the court, but he also never said he would, and I'm
Mhm.
just going by his record. So number 4, do you support requiring CRT to be taught in schools? Should the court have struck down racial quotas? Okay, so this is probably his weakest position, and I'll tell
Mhm.
you why. He lamented the Supreme Court decision to remove affirmative action. And I've heard him give his reasons. And the problem is he's stuck in the 60s and 70s. And this is one place where he's not well educated on. He
Mhm.
doesn't understand the underlying things that is CRT. He's right where Trump was when Trump was educated about this. So he needs someone like Chris Rufo or somebody in his ear to be an advisor on this, because he's thinking 60s and 70s civil rights, where uh, schools and corporations were actively trying to keep minorities out. So you needed a system to help them break through that. And this is where governments can come in and say, look, you're doing this thing that's wrong. and we need to push it through. Now, in his lament that it was wrong, I'm actually with Ginsburg on this. In her opinion, the problem with Ginsburg is she was not specific enough. She said when they first confirmed it, what was it, 2003, 2000, somewhere early 2000s. And she said, well, in her opinion was we're keeping this going for now, but there has to be an end to this. Problem is she never gave
Yeah.
any
What?
kind of definition
Okay,
of what the end
fine.
could be.
What is your limiting principle then? So
So
we
I
know when
think
we get there.
again, the argument isn't a yes or no. The argument is, well, what should the parameter be? And because there was no parameter, they had to make another yes or no decision 15, 20 years later. And if you would come to me and made an argument with something of, okay, nobody is alive now that was under Jim Crow, that's the end point. Okay, that could be the end point, and it's not there yet. So we could have set an endpoint and kept it going. And if that was the argument, and I think that's where he is in his head, he's still seeing I mean, he's old enough to remember when it existed. So he's also old enough to know to there are other people old enough to have been under it, right? So he's coming from that perspective. I think he needs to educate himself more on this, especially when you talk about the question of when does the left go too far, because this is part of when the left goes too
Yeah.
far. And so this is, I think, his weakest issue, because he's kind of stuck in the 60s a lot. He wants to be the next JFK, or what people thought his father could be, the original RFK could be. And that's a great thing for our country right now in a lot of ways, but also there are new problems that he's not privy to. So he could be taken advantage of, but I think if the right people were around him, they could help him not be taken advantage of. And he's a smart guy. Maybe he's learning on the fly, and this is something he picks up along the way, because he's going to hear something like I did several years ago. I heard something, I'm like, that don't make sense. I need to make it make sense. So I'm going to read their material and learn it. And we'll see what happens there. I will admit, his weakest position. Any thoughts on that before we move to the next one?
I'm still optimistic about him though, because even though it is his weakest position, he has demonstrated enough that I think if someone explained to him what CRT actually is, of, oh no, this is haranguing white children and making them feel bad and telling them they're racist just for the color of their skin, and affirmative action is now being used to discriminate against Asian people, I think he would be more amenable to the kind of solutions we would prefer.
Or and the thing is, anything he puts forward will be from that old school thought, and the colorblind thought, the classical liberal thought. So anything that comes forward from him will be actually more akin to what we think is right.
That's a good point, because so using this issue in particular, where the right says that the left has it wrong is because fairness is a wholly subjective notion as far as I'm concerned. So you can't legislate fairness, but at least with the old-fashioned
I'm gonna make that more
leftists.
specific.
Well, yeah, hold on.
Fairness in outcome.
Yes.
That's the difference. Fairness in outcome, not fairness in opportunity.
But at least with the old-fashioned Democrat, liberal, leftist idea, you were at least pushing for a worthwhile goal. It is no longer that case. When was it Kendi who flat out said that the cure for past racism is current racism? You're no longer even pretending that you want fairness. That now
he'll tell you you're misunderstanding him. I'm like, how many ways can you read that? I mean,
yeah. And then
but
you go to the practical examples of, oh, this is exactly word for word what was said in an elementary school telling white children that they're terrible because they're white.
On a side note about Kendi, his reason for not debating people and for his rebuttal to anything anybody says about his writings is, oh, you're just misunderstanding, and you'll just misunderstand what I'm saying. My answer to that is, go give back your PhD till you can explain it in a way that's accurate. That's reasonable to me.
Yeah.
If you can't say something without being misunderstood, then you don't deserve that degree.
That's why you have advisors when you do a master's or PhD. It's because the advisor is there to say, well, what do you mean by this? Well, what about that? Well, what about that? Okay. Okay. Well, now you've explained it, but now then what do you mean by this? The point is to work those things out so that you have a coherent argument, a coherent idea that is understandable.
Here's the easiest one. Number 5. Do you agree with Eisenhower's warning about the military industrial complex? How would you handle what's NK?
North Korea.
North Korea, Iraq, Iran, and Ukraine? The answer is yes.
Yeah. So here's why it's a two-part question, though, and where I think uh, there might be some concern with the right or on the right, but we're so far over the cliff now that it might not matter. But so you can agree with, and the more evidence that comes out, especially now, that of how right Eisenhower was, but you still have the question of, okay, but then what do you do about these listed issues? North Korea, Iran, they clearly hate us. China, you throw that in there, although that's not as much of a military issue yet, as an economic and a political issue. All right, so what do you do about these belligerent, hostile actors who could very well attack us, or have attacked us, or have sponsored attacks on us? And I think that is where I'm not sure what his answer is foreign policy wise. I know he would be in agreement with a lot of
Yeah,
the new right about why are we involved in this stuff.
Yeah, he's spoken length on this, and I can't remember if the town hall or the Q&A from the New Hampshire, whatever the New Hampshire local syndicate is, but he did speak in length of this. He's very much his Ukraine plan is, if people are familiar with what Musk put out about a year ago now, that it was just, he's like, we need to get to the table, we need to do this, there's going to be concessions, and it's not agreeing with anything anybody's done, but we're too far along. We're too far along in the process. We let it happen. We started the process in a lot of ways, and so we need to go ahead and end the Ukraine issue. And then on the economic political, like you said with China, said, let's not provoke them into being a military adversary. Let's go ahead and have a friendly economic competition with them, because that's what is going to be healthy for everybody, because everybody's going to get better. So this is one of those questions that he said, this isn't something that's going to be reconciled overnight. The first step is being a mediator in Ukraine, in a peace talk, not in a give them more weapons talk. Because all we are, it's not a humanitarian effort if we're causing more people to die.
Also not a humanitarian effort if you're not bothering to see where the money's actually going.
Yeah, he stayed out of that part, but at the same time, end this now and make the best of what's already there. Then start competing on an economic front with everybody else, because that competition can be like in sports. Everybody gets a little better. And when everybody gets a little better, then we start supporting each other. And then someone like Iran pops up. Well, if you got the support of China and Russia and the Ukraine and all of Europe, Iran's not going to do shit.
My biggest concern, foreign policy wise, is actually China, because I don't know. I haven't heard him talk about it, and I don't know. See, this is where I make everybody mad, because Trump didn't even get it. Because for Trump, it was all economic. It was all about, we're getting screwed by these bad deals. So he just wanted to make better deals so that not just, the few elites, the Mitch McConnells and his wife Elaine Chao, have been getting rich off of China for years, even though they're in elected office. How's that work? But I digress. And the Amazons and Walmarts of the world and Apple, those people are getting rich, but actually make quality deals that will actually affect all of America and will help all of America. To me, that was in and of itself problematic. He was at least recognizing that China was an adversary, an avowed adversary. By their own words, they want to crush us economically and, if they can, militarily.
Mhm.
I don't know. I haven't
But
heard
it's
him
in that
speak.
order. It's economically first. And that's what he said. We need to strengthen our economy to be a force to
the
be reckoned with.
the problem with uh underestimating China's threat level is that one of the ways they've become so militarily powerful is because we were sold on this idea of economic competition and economic ties, which just allowed them to strengthen their military. So you can have this. Um, I liked the way Bet David put it to Vivek in their little town hall of competing with China economically means moving away from China. I don't know if RK understands that or not. It means disentangling our economic relationship
Well, yeah,
from
because
China.
we are so dependent on Chinese production, and that has to change. That's
Mhm.
obvious. But here's the thing about China's military. If China wants to bolster their military, they have the freedom to do so. What they do with it is what they don't have the freedom to do so. Like I said about if we spend a gazillion dollars on our military as a deterrent, I'm okay with that. But and if China does the same thing, I'm okay with that. They have the freedom to do that. That's their country. They can defend themselves. Who's to say 30 years from now Russia doesn't say we don't like you, China. We're going to blow you up. China needs to be able to defend themselves, and we should actually support them in that, because who's the aggressor there? Or it's the other way around. Russia has the freedom to build their military to defend themselves. And if China was an aggressor towards them, we should support Russia. It's like being a referee on a basketball court. Who initiated contact, right? Who's the foul getting called on? And every country has the freedom to do that. It's what they're going to do with it. And personally, I would not support their efforts, but they have the freedom to do so. And my response would be just to make sure that we're not an easy target for anybody to come across. And we're going to only help ourselves by bolstering our economy, because the economy is
Yeah.
upstream from the military.
Mhm.
If everybody's doing well and we're a healthier country, then we can afford to be the biggest, baddest country as well. But if we're dependent on their production, all they have to do is stop production to the US. And we're going to go through a 10-year, 15-year growing pain of restarting that here. Why not go through that growing pain while they're still trickling stuff over?
Exactly. All right.
All right, but that's getting outside the scope of the conversation, because now we're talking our own opinions versus what he said.
Mhm.
Number 6. Whoops, that's still number 5. Go. There we go. What is causing increased crime in US cities? Does gun control reduce crime, and what guns would you take? This one he has answered very
I
specifically.
haven't I haven't heard him talk about it specifically. I have heard the clip where he said something to the effect of, and this may have been the town hall, the uh the town hall he did of it. If you think gun control will stop rising crime, you're being lied to, or something to that
Yeah,
effect.
it was pretty much word for word that. If no, he says if a politician tells you that adding gun control is going to stop the crime, then you're being lied to. You're being sold a tale. And he gives a story of when he was a kid, they had shooting classes at school. People would bring their own rifles and everything, but they never had school shootings. So he's actually more in favor of alternative solutions. He said, well, you know what? Let's do this like scientific studies and evaluate what could actually help. And you could do different things in different places. Like if we have to treat schools like airports, maybe that's the answer. But his other one that's controversial, of course, because money comes from pharma, he said you can actually draw a straight line from SSRI use and gun violence in schools, because one of the side effects is suicidal or homicidal tendencies. So no, I can't say that's the answer, but should it be studied? That's his answer to all
It,
the pharma questions.
it,
Everybody's like, "Oh, you're anti-vaccine." He's like, all I want is this stuff to be studied.
well, and that's why it is paired with his "you're being lied to" comment,
Mhm.
because the reflexive leftist commentary after every shooting is, see, this is why we need more gun control. And he's simply saying, there are other avenues of research that we had better look into, because what you're talking about, one, is drastic, two, is going to cause a huge cultural fight, but perhaps most importantly, might not do a damn thing about school shootings.
Mhm.
And then where are you at after you have caused all these previous problems, and now you still have the death toll?
And in that same conversation, he's made two statements. The first one, a little bit more benign, is we're past the point of no return with allowing people to have guns because there's just so many already
There are
there.
literally more guns
Yeah.
than people in the United
And
States.
he alluded to the fact, although he didn't say it in direct words, but you could tell this is what he was talking about, that if he's talking about uniting the country instead of dividing the country, and this would be something that was a complete divisive aspect. And he alluded to the fact is, if you want to start a civil war, this is what you do.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to start a civil war, you ban guns and you go get them from the people who already have them. And that's exactly how you start a civil war. And I'm putting words into his mouth, but you could really tell that's what he was talking about, because he piggybacked that on actual national unity. Uh, and it's pretty obvious because, yeah, that's, I actually think the real hardcore gun control people that want to take everybody's guns want a civil war. They want the
Yep.
reaction from it. And in fact, the reaction from it is going to be used as evidence that they needed to do it in the first
Or,
place.
or if not a full-on civil war, they think they can get a couple of high-profile incidents from it to escalate what they
Well,
want.
look at it this way. If you're a Malthusian, and if you're a hardcore power hungry leftist, and you wanted the vote to be in your direction every time, every year, if you went and took everybody's guns and you banked on some people responding in a way that would get them killed, what's the percentage of conservatives that would die versus liberals? Or I should say progressives, not liberals.
Mm-hmm.
Liberty being the root word of liberal. But what would the percentage be? You could cull the voting population down. None of this, we're going to let immigrants in to get votes. No, we could just go ahead and get rid of conservatives legally by passing a law that says we can come take your gun.
Yep. All right.
Number
Next.
7. Let's see. Number 7. What percentage of the GDP should the government take in taxes, and should spending be more or less than that? Are we spending too much or taxing too little? This is another one that you had to do indirectly, because I even looked on the internet for tax policy or anything. And his tax, let me bring it up. Let me see if I can switch here. This is the closest I could get to an actual answer on how much should be taxed. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. voters keep current rates but eliminate deductions and loopholes, versus the actual party, which is to raise taxes. So he's not in line with the Democratic Party on raised taxes, but
Mm-hmm.
there is a little bit of play there. Well, what are you talking about with loopholes? What are you talking about with deductions? Because I own a business, and deductions are how you separate gross from net profit.
Yep.
Right. So are you talking those deductions, or are you talking just random things that people take advantage of that aren't really reflective of their net profit versus their gross? So that one's hard to answer there. Now, I will say, from his words, he talks about revenue for the things he wants to spend money on coming from a reduction in the things that he thinks are being spent on that he doesn't agree with, like taking money from the Ukrainian deals to spend on food stamps. He used that example directly. Like, we're reducing, food stamp cost of living benefits at the exact same time that we're spending billions of dollars in the Ukraine. So that's kind of his stance on that. He, as far as what he wants to do with the IRS in general, that the graphic I brought up is the closest I could get. But as far as where the revenue should come from the things he does want to spend money on, he really does talk about it from a transferring from the useless things we're spending money on, which I'm kind of on board with, because I do think we should have social safety nets, but at the same time, we could get that. We're spending stupid money. What was his analogy? He said it's like the alcoholic that can't afford their rent or buy their food or anything, but still goes to the bar and buys a round for everybody, thinking that they're his best friend. That's
Good
what we're doing
analogy.
around the
Yeah.
world. We're spending money to all these people thinking we're going to be the best friends with them all, and they're going to benefit us as much as we are, when we're not buying food at home.
Is the next question the one about the Fed?
No, the next question, 8, is abortion.
Okay.
8 is when and why does a fetus become a person? What role should government have in regulating abortion? And he is pro-life. Then this is once you probably watched this clip. He said, "I am pro-life, but also am supportive of a woman's right to choose." So in my personal life, I would never hire for an abortion, but politically, I am pro-choice, is his answer. But he also says he would eliminate third-term abortions as a golden rule. So when we're talking a federal case for it, like I've talked about before, we're almost to the point in this fight that it could be solved by some federal intervention that's done in a form of an amendment, because then it would be the best, closest deal to what's right. Because everybody has to come together. You need, what, 32 states to ratify it, 30 something states to
I
ratify
think
it.
so. Yeah.
And you need a majority vote in the Senate. So you don't, I mean, a super majority vote in the Senate. You need 60 plus to vote for it.
That's one way, or you can call a convention of states. You
Either way, you're
yeah.
going to get the biggest compromise that you could possibly get. And if his stance is a decent one, third trimester, no abortions, I think that's something pretty much every state could agree on, and only the radicals wouldn't.
Well, and this is where DeSantis got a little bit of a bump recently on the right from this stupid NBC interview where this dingbat pretty girl. No one says that. No one's saying that on the left. All RFK is doing there is going back, 20 years in what the Democrat Party platform used to be, or at least the talking point used to be safe, legal, and rare.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was the Democrat talking point. Now it's shout your abortion. Now it's the Virginia governor saying on a radio show, as a doctor, well, in that case, if we'd had a fetus survive the abortion, we would quote, make it comfortable, then have a discussion with the mother about what she wanted to do. But supposedly DeSantis is lying when he says that there are Democrats who think up to and including right after birth.
Well, and this is a hard one for us reasonable, and I'm going to put RFK in that lump, then the class of reasonable left of center people, is we do think it should be legal, but the whole safe, rare thing has gone out the window. Mm-hmm. Because if you're, and I really implore these supposed empathetic left people to actually have some empathy for a right-leaning person who doesn't agree with abortion, who thinks every fetus is a life. If you really think every fetus is a life, then the leading cause of death in the US is abortion. By a long shot. It's like 600,000 cardiac related deaths. The leading cause, what we call the leading cause of death. There's 800 and plus thousand, closing in on 1 million some years, abortions a year. So if you really are empathetic and you think you can feel what other people feel, then feel what that person that thinks every fetus is a life is feeling, when the leading cause of death in the world is the thing that you support. Okay, so now, I can feel that, but I can also have the thought that, well, there is a point where women have to have reproductive control. They have to have the keys to the car because they're the ones that are detrimented the most from it. And there is a point where that fetus is not viable yet. Now, here's one place I have changed my opinion. And Tim Pool can be credited for this because he brought this idea up on one of his podcasts. He brought up the idea of abortion being a general term, by definition, ending the pregnancy. But if the baby is viable, it's you birth it, you C-section the baby. That's the abortion. The baby still lives. What's wrong with that? And the person arguing against him was, well, the mother has a right to choose. Yeah, you chose to have an abortion. Doesn't mean the baby has to die. You're going through a surgical procedure no matter what. Why does the baby have to die? And
that is an interesting way to look at it. It's also an interesting rhetorical device because then you really nail down, is this person
arguing
pro-choice or pro-abortion?
Yeah, that's the thing. This person looked, well, and even by definition, not pro-abortion, because the definition is terminate the pregnancy. The pregnancy is terminated when the baby is born.
Well, this is where
now you're saying terminate the child.
Now you're getting into uber Malthusian, worshiping ball, throwing the babies in the fires. That's a literal thing that happened.
Yeah, and so having worked with many, many, many young athletes, sometimes all people want is a chance. And even a baby preemie is going to have issues in development, but they have a chance. There's still, there's plenty of preemies that became something awesome. And
so let me get in my 2 cents real quick here, because I think this matters on this issue. You brought up the point earlier, and I think it matters, is if you're going to have empathy and going to be able to discuss with someone who is uber pro-life, to your point, you need to understand that from where they're coming from, abortion is the leading cause of death in America. All right. So you need to have empathy there. On the other side, and this is something that the guy on the Steve Day show who's actually the most pro-life brought up, is he has a really difficult time squaring that circle and ever voting for anyone who is pro-choice because of how strongly to your point, how strongly he feels that abortion is the leading cause of death in America. It's as tragedy as on as big a scale as the issue of slavery was. However, we have come to a point now where the definition of what is pro-life needs to be expanded. And that is something that RFK gets more right than anyone else in the field, Democrat or Republican. Because what is forcing you to get a vaccine that you don't trust? What is that but a pro-life issue? Well, what is what is forced masking but a pro-life issue? You're being muzzled. That's your life. What is that but a pro-life issue? And on that part of it, RFK is batting 1,000.
Yeah, and I said empathy for one side, now empathy back the other way. When we talk about female mate value, everybody talks about, okay, the rapes and everything. Okay, that's already in the law. That can happen. I mean, you can have the abortion based on that. And anybody who argues against that is showing their ignorance. And then it's like, well, anything other than that, from a conservative side, they're saying, well, they made the choice. They could have just not had sex, and there's a group of people that are being left out. And I will say this from a family standpoint, as something that's a little bit near and dear, from the great poet Everlast. Mary got pregnant from a kid named Tom, said he was in love. He said, "Don't worry about a thing, baby doll. I'm the man you've been dreaming of." 3 months later, he say he won't date her or return her calls. That's the group of people that are being left out. That person's mate value is forever dropped, having that child from a guy who was supposed to stick around. And this is the choice when I think of, well, when I'm thinking of when the line should be drawn. 3 months is after a lot of states now. 3 months is 12 weeks, right? So Texas, you can't do that anymore. So you're forever the single mom that can't get a guy or has a lot bigger trouble getting the next guy. And you tend to attract scummy guys when you already have a child. So this person has this burden put on him, and no child support is ever going to fix it. That's the population I'm thinking of when I'm saying, okay, so where should we draw the line? Now, obviously, I'm with RFK. Third trimester is out of the window. It's out of it is a no deal. But 3 months is, I mean, we're talking in a range where this this being never had consciousness. It existed, it was a life, but it never had consciousness. And so now I'm in my realm. And I think that's where RFK is. So to answer for him, that's his stance. Putting my feelings on where he came to that stance in his mind. My words in his mouth. Okay. The number 9. What's number 9?
This one's
Oh,
important.
this one's an easy one.
Yeah, but the details are important here because I know his general thoughts on this, but I'm curious about the details.
The details would be, and of course we're talking in hindsight, and he had the benefit of hindsight, is he wouldn't have even closed down as much as conservative states.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, so here's the question for those just listening. In the event of another emergency like COVID, what would you do? Would you take the California or Florida approach, or something in between? The answer is, out of his own mouth, is lockdowns should never have happened. So definitely we're saying not the California approach. He also says mandates should never have happened. So definitely not the California approach there. But even still, again, he's speaking from hindsight, and he's got the luxury to do this because he wasn't a politician at the time. By his words, he would have taken the Jay Bhattacharya approach and have had targeted prevention, basically protect the old people and let everybody else live their life. And that's where he's talking from. And it's hindsight for him now with what already happened, but I do believe he would take that approach if something else happened, if another emergency happened.
Well, especially since it doesn't make him any political friends, because
Mm-hmm.
even people who are really staunchly, anti everything that happened, most of them still say, yeah, that first month or so, because we didn't know what was going on, because it was, confusing and scary. So they'll still excuse those initial lockdowns. But it sounds like he's saying, no, we shouldn't have ever had any of these lockdowns.
Well, and if you look at the timelines, and you have to wonder how much time was there for filing. But Children's Health Alliance, which is his legal nonprofit, has been fighting for schools to be open since they first closed down. This process started as soon as they shut the first door. So was he just preempting something, or did he never want them to be shut down? That's the question. The timeline shows that he never wanted them to be shut down.
And that he's consistent.
Yeah.
Something I'd like to hear more of, and that's why I'm glad to hear that he draws a very sharp line there. So I believe it was Iowa is the only one to do this, and this has been what I've been shouting about since the beginning: is how can you have an emergency temporary measure if it never expires? All of the stuff that Iowa did, whether it was mask mandates or lockdowns or whatever, all of them had an end by date.
That's
All of them had an
exactly the same as we
expiration.
talked about with affirmative action earlier. It was pushing it to the future, but there was no date. Or back to many episodes ago, our slippery slope discussion. Yeah, you can go down the slope, but you have to say, well, this is the point where we'll stop if I'm going to make an agreement with
even
you.
X amount of time to flatten the curve. Okay, well, what does flattening the curve look like? What is the demarcation there where we know we have either succeeded or we haven't, and this isn't working? So there were never any lines there.
Right. Number 10 gets a little more complicated. Is the country over or under regulated? And this is one where I would have to say, if I gave a short answer for him, he would say under. And here's why. The corporate government collusion, the corporate capture of the government. And in his own words, the NIH won't do anything that will offend the pharmaceutical companies. And if this is where I'd say he would say it's underregulated and he would regulate more. But his process for doing so, the first step in that is to take the money from the companies out of the regulatory bodies, because it does no good to regulate if the people who are doing the regulating make the rules, or who the people who are being regulated make the rules, I should say. Because then all you do is what's happening now is they make the regulations in a certain way that nobody can compete with them. Look at the tech companies. They want section 230 because no company can come in and compete with them now. Or they want that removed. They want that removed so that no company can come in and compete with them, because they're not robust enough to handle the moderating effort it would take to keep any offensive post off of their social media site. So Twitter under Jack Dorsey, not under Musk, and Facebook under Zuckerberg and everything, they want that removed so they can moderate the hell out of people to say, I'm saving my butt because I have no protection anymore.
The way one of the guys on the Steve Day show put it, I liked and is probably accurate, is that we, as in those of us on the right, would probably be disappointed at his answer on the various industries he thinks are over underregulated, but would probably be happy about the various agencies that he thinks are over underregulated. Because I think
Look at
it's
his
not
work.
just the removing the money out of the issue, it's from what I've heard him speak before, it's also the idea that the agencies themselves have too much autonomous power to regulate, so that when the industry money comes in, they have the power to say, oh sure, we'll do it this way, when that should be a legislative function. But it is a regulatory function, so that these FDA, NIH people can do basically whatever the hell they want, and then, oh look, now they're on the board of that company.
Yeah. And
literally.
I mean, people have to remember, he has made his living suing both the EPA and the FDA. Is starting with the EPA because he was an environmental guy before, but it's not in the equitable environmental crisis Greta Thunberg way. It was in, they're pumping all these chemicals into the Hudson Bay and everything's dying.
The very tangible effects on real people. Yeah. Representing
And,
those kinds of people.
And then it turned out in his lawsuits and actions, it turned out he ended up having to sue the EPA because the EPA was basically just not doing their job in regulating these companies. And not only were they not doing their job, they were not doing their job because they're being paid by these companies. And so then when that turned to pharmaceuticals, he ended up just doing the exact same process with the FDA. And so, yeah, I would say he would say it's underregulated, but it's underregulated because of the corporate capture. And his answer would be to first remove the corporate capture and then see where we go from there. Because like you said about immigration and guns and everything, should we be looking at new laws or just enforcing the laws that are already on the books? All he did was force the EPA to enforce their own laws to fix the problem. The laws were already there. They just weren't doing it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had a legal case, because he would have had to petition Congress to create the laws that are being broken. Instead, because they were already there, he had a legal case to take it to the Supreme Court. So yeah, it's underregulated, but not in the fact that the laws don't exist, but in the fact that there are people turning blind eyes because of their own profit. Number 11. Let's see. This one. How well has the Federal Reserve managed unemployment and inflation? What do you think of its role? Okay.
And this is the order here, I think, was wrong. This should have been right after the tax and spend question, because they go together. That's why I was asking where it was.
Yeah, and I'd say his answer was the same, because he did talk about inflation, and realistically, he linked it with the fact that we're spending so much money overseas on all these stupid projects, and basically funding ourselves by funding other countries, like you said, follow the
Hmm.
money. And his first step would be to reduce that bloat going out from the country, and then you don't have to print more money. So
But
I think
this
actually, if
is
you listen to him talk on things like that, unless he's got extremely large domestic policies that he hasn't talked about, he would be in favor of not just reducing spending, but actually have negative spending, because
and
we spend so much money on these other things.
this is where I would trust him as a candidate more than a lot of others, is because even if I haven't heard him talk about the Federal Reserve, but the way I've heard him talk about other agencies and other um uh corporate government collusion, is if he took a hard look at the Federal Reserve, I think he would feel the way a lot of conservative libertarian people feel about it, which is, why does this even exist?
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a semi-private organization that is utilizing legislative authority that it doesn't have. So where the Federal Reserve, where it impacts inflation is from, and I've talked about this before, the big term a little while ago was quantitative easing. So you don't even need a sleazy legislature to give billions of dollars to the Ukraine, because the Federal Reserve has been doing that kind of crap for years, where what they'll do is, instead of like an aid package, like would be voted in by a legislature, they will simply provide guaranteed loans or capital to shore up a bank. So rather than, yes, we're not giving this aid package to the Ukraine, but the Federal Reserve just hit a couple of buttons, and now all of a sudden they just put $10 million in Ukraine's national bank to help shore it up. That's printing money. That is a power of the legislature. Constitutionally, you do not have that authority, but that's what the Federal Reserve is doing. It is a major component of our current inflation because it keeps doing this stuff with absolutely zero oversight.
Mm-hmm. And add to that the fact that if he was to be able to shift the way we spend money, I can't think of enough domestic policies to spend money on that would make up for what we're spending overseas. So we would have an automatic deflationary period, just because we would be under budget if we cut a lot of these stupid programs we have going overseas. The last one, this one is also one of the easier ones. What role should the government play in regulating free speech on social media? The answer is none. And in fact, if you want, money where the mouth is, he was the first person to be censored on social media in this whole. We can't just say the Biden era, the collusion era, the Time Magazine collusion era. He was one of the first people to be censored on social media, and it was because of the lawsuits that came out of that we got a lot of the information we did. And his after his announcement speech, his first major interview was on Twitter Spaces with Elon Musk and David Sachs, talking about this very issue. So if people are unclear about his stance on social media censorship, I think he might
It,
be even a little bit vengefully free speech,
if
not
you're
just not just pro free
yes,
speech.
if
Yeah.
you're unclear, go watch. Who was it? Was it Debbie Wasserman Schultz that wanted him censored for being an anti-Semite when he was appearing before a committee on censorship?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wow, just really not hiding it at all there, are you? Your contempt for this guy who's actually in your party.
Let's see. That's all 12 questions. Let's see. My negatives about him, I wanted to be fair and balanced. I already talked about one,
Mhm.
that he's behind the times on the racial and gender movements. he's still thinking about, civil unions and, you know, busing and, that kind of thing, when we're not only past that, but we're on a negative recorrection course in the last 10 years. And I don't think he's privy enough to that. So we already talked about that one. His opinions on student loans, he's a pro forgiveness. And I think he's short-sighted because he's not addressing the problem, which is
Mhm.
the administrative bloat and the fact that we're just basically creating a second high school with universities now and making everybody go to them to even have a chance, when realistically you're making up degrees to get people to come
Yeah.
in. So I think he's a little short-sighted on that as well. So those are my two big negatives about him. Uh, but realistically, what I want to say to conservatives, if you need all 12 of these to be satisfactory answers, then look at your own candidates, because none of your candidates are going to answer all 12 of these to your
Mhm.
satisfaction. And if they do, they're probably lying.
My takeaway is that the reason the questions are important is because it goes to a recognition of what time it is and what the state of the country actually is. This is why, you know, uh, Pence and Haley, and who was the other one who lit himself on fire at that Iowa event?
Oh,
That
Hutchinson.
Hutchinson,
Yeah.
yeah, that Tucker was interviewing him, and just the blindness and or arrogance to say, well, that's not my concern. What? Then you don't know where we are and what's going on.
Yeah. Well,
And
my thing is you're at a kind of a town hall setting with Tucker there. Everything he asked was a concern of your party.
mhm.
And you're vying for the nomination of that party. So everything that was asked is your concern.
um, right now, my presidential candidate preference is DeSantis, Vivek, RFK Jr. If somehow RFK won the Democratic nomination and he goes against Trump, I'll vote for him before I vote for Trump, because RFK has an actual core philosophical identity. Trump does not, and he never has. And if that makes you angry because you're a Trump fan, I don't know what you're doing here, because I've been saying this stuff for a long time. Trump's core identity is winning. That's not an identity. That's a tactic at best. Okay? That is why you had the last year of his presidency. That is why the guy who was going to drain the swamp turned his administration over to the swamp, which I don't even think it's arguable, definitively lost him his reelection. Why? Because that's what he thought he needed to win. It wasn't.
I think it was an attention thing too, because he wanted to do the thing no president has ever done. Peace in the Middle East,
Mm,
which is arguably one of his greatest achievements had it lasted, which it
mhm.
didn't last long after he was gone, but he did achieve it. And this is the thing I talk about. I would rather have a raging narcissist in power than a Machiavellian manipulative uh, person, because
Mhm.
I at least know the direction the narcissist is going to go, because it's whatever direction gets him the most acclaim. And what better than peace in the Middle East, right? And lots of people's lives were saved by that. So that's a good thing. Now, like you said, he lost attention. He lost his focus, because had he really been thinking and not just thinking about himself, he would have done both. He would have found a way to do both. Now, he may have been assassinated in the process, but he would have found a way to do both. But he was singularly focused on this thing that nobody had ever done, that nobody had ever achieved. And so he thought that would, and once he got it, he kind of coasted. He was like, I'm president again. Nobody's going to vote against me. I've done the hardest thing. And
The,
then
the
COVID
the
hit.
numbers for the economy were very good,
Yeah.
especially compared to the previous 8 years. So yeah, I really think he thought he could coast. And again, that's because he doesn't have a core philosophy other than I want to win. For me, it's why he keeps talking about loyalty. Screw you, dude. Nobody, you're a politician. Nobody owes you loyalty. You loyalty to us. Stop talking about what someone needs to do for you. You want our vote. Tell us what you're going to do for us. And the big thing that needs to be done right now is something you said earlier when we were talking about taxing and spending. We need negative spending right now. We we have gone so far over the cliff in deficit and debt. We can't just reduce spending and survive. We need to go backwards.
Well,
We
that's why I
need
hate the
someone,
headlines that are deflations at the lowest over the last 4 months than it's been in the last several. I'm like, no, we don't need the lowest inflation in the last several years. We need deflation for a while.
or we're in trouble.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the country has moved so far to the progressive side. We need someone who genuinely understands. We need to pull the Overton window back. We need to pull the goalposts back so that we have a chance of getting closer to being back on the field we're supposed to be on. Because right now we're playing tackle football in the parking lot and it hurts.
mm-hmm.
We need people who understand we need to pull things backwards, not just make the best of things as they are. And those are the only three candidates I actually trust to, at varying levels, to varying degrees, in varying areas, to actually pull things backwards. And the reason, just briefly, the reason DeSantis for me is number one is because he's actually done it. He actually did it in. So I love all the things Vivek is saying right now, but the reason he's number two is simply because he hasn't proven it. I
Mm-hmm.
would feel much better if he had like run for governor of Ohio and done in Ohio what DeSantis had done in Florida, and then he would be my number one. But simply because I've been jaded too much by politicians in the past, Trump being one of them, he's my number two simply because he doesn't have the record. But I still put him over the guy who espouses the leftist ideology because he at least is very good at espousing my own ideology.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as anyone else in the field, no, I would vote for RFK over anyone else in the Republican field for that reason, that I think he will actually pull the country back to some degree of sanity.
So I'm taking things one step at a time. First of all, I'm thinking primaries, and I either have the choice. In Texas, you can vote in either primary, but you're stuck with that primary. So I either have the choice of voting in the Democrat primary, and in that case, I vote for RFK because he's the only person that could unseat Biden at this point. And if Biden was to bow out for some reason and Gavin Newsom jumps in, RFK has the best chance of beating Newsom. So there's one situation there, and we'll see what happens with Biden in the next year to where I go there. Or I could vote in the Republican primary, which my number one would be Vivek there. So if it's Biden, RFK on the ballot, I'm going Democrat, voting RFK to get that pushed forward. If it's RFK and Newsom, I kind of play what the polls are. If RFK is going to run away with it, then maybe I'll pop over and vote Vivek. That's where the decision is, because I want, not only do I want the candidate I like, I want to make the most impact with my vote. And the closer the race is in one area or the other, the more impact I can make as a single vote.
You and I and a lot of other people are probably going to have to wait until the beginning of March, because I think Super Tuesday is usually that second Tuesday in March.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to wait till the beginning of March to see what the race actually looks like and who's actually still in it, because it's a long way away right now.
And so let's say RFK somehow makes it through the primary and he's the candidate. Then it depends on who's on the Republican side for me to make a decision. If it's RFK Vivek, that's going to be a hard one for me because they both stand for a lot of things I think I stand for. If it's RFK Trump, which is probably, if RFK makes it through, it would probably most likely be RFK Trump. Then what does Trump do with his VP pick? Does he convince Vivek to do the number two, which Vivek says he never would, which I think he's posturing a little bit there. He's having that confident I'm going to win it all thing. Does he convince that? Because that's an actually intriguing ticket there. because now you're not only talking having a VP that will keep you in check on your policies, but also you're talking maybe a 12-year rebuild, because then you got the 4 with him as VP, and then a possible 8 after that with him doing a lot of things if he continues with them that I think are actually good for the country. On the other side, you got RFK, and there's an 8-year rebuild. So that's a really hard decision, and I wouldn't make a decision on that till after they debate. And also, it depends on who RFK picks for his VP. Because if he comes in and picks some super, an AOC type or something for his VP, then I'm sorry, you lost me. And we talked about possible VPs and speculated. I don't understand why your choices for VP aren't part of the primary process, because that's a huge thing. If Biden had been forced to say, well, you know what? Of the people in this group, Kamala would be my VP. A lot less people would have voted for him in the primary, because they hated her in the primaries.
Oh yeah, she couldn't even win her own state. That is a clear indication you're not what you're being packaged as, which is the return to normal candidate. It also depends on what he says about it and why he picks. So like W was able to get a lot of support for picking Cheney, and it wasn't just that he picked Cheney, it was he explicitly said, I'm picking him because of all of his foreign policy experience. And then so a lot of people on the right who were a little unsure about Bush because of his youth and because of his background said, okay, but I trust him because Cheney was there under Reagan, Cheney was there under HW. So, okay. So if Trump would do something like that and not just pick Vivek, not just convince him to run, but say, I'm picking him because I'm going to put him in charge of executing his plan for whatever. For me, the thing I like about Vivek most is the 75% reduction in executive employees. That's what you're in charge of as my vice president. All right, I'll vote for you there. I'll vote for Trump then. But if he doesn't have something concrete like that, it would still be hard to win me over, because I don't trust him.
Yeah, but again, I'm not going to make a presidential decision until I have everything in front of me. Like, I can give you an easy example. Biden runs wild and Trump runs wild, and they're against each other, and we got the unspeakable decision again. No brainer there. You got to pick Trump there. Just even with that taint on that little bit of oil on your tongue after you've eaten the thing, the stale chip, it's still not what we have now. But Biden and anybody else on the Republican side, DeSantis, Vivek, I don't think anybody else has a chance other than DeSantis and Vivek personally. But Haley, I would vote for her over Biden. That's a no-brainer. So yeah, if Biden wins the nomination on the left, it's a no-brainer that I'm probably, if it's the top 3 I talked about, I would vote for them. If not, I'll probably just vote Libertarian just for the hell of it, But yeah, it's one thing at a time, primary first. And right now where it's sitting, I'm voting RFK to get Biden out of the ticket.
Well, here's the other thing that isn't being taken seriously enough, I don't think, on the right. It's so that all of Trump's legal troubles infuriate me on so many levels. One of them is I don't think he's taking it seriously enough. You're fundraising off of this, but you're not. But are you really fighting it? I don't know that you are. His plan seems to be, I just need to get elected and pardon myself. That's not a plan. And again, that's all about you. That's not about.
And this is one reason I wanted to talk about DeSantis in the end, because this is Trump. This is where Trump is not stupid. Trump is a raging narcissist, and here's what smart narcissists do. They provoke their competition. And look at the things that are happening, not just at him, but around him. Elon Musk just got fined by whatever entity for not giving away private messages that involve Trump.
They threatened to fine him. Yeah, they threatened to fine him.
Yeah. So now the hand is overextending. Trump is just sitting there going,
Well, okay, but here's the problem, and again, this is the problem with his style and his lack of philosophy is that might have worked for you before, and it definitely worked for you in, celebrity business that you were in the 80s and 90s, but I don't think he or certainly a lot of people and the commentators on the right aren't taking this seriously. And there was recently a poll out that something like 60% of Iowa voters don't think Trump's going to jail. You better believe they want him to go to jail. This is the leftist wet dream, but it's not just going to jail. Here's the part that is insidious, and I don't think people are paying enough attention to. They want a conviction so they can keep him off the ballot. There's
Well,
a
let me be more specific. They want a conviction after the primary, so they can have him on the primary ballot and off the general ballot.
Mhm. Yeah, and that is something that needs to be considered is there's a good chance every blue state in the nation will not have, and you can say, oh, well, the Supreme Court will, it doesn't matter. First of all, the Supreme Court punted on the last election because they didn't want to get embroiled in controversy. And two, even if they don't punt, is it going to get there in time for him to actually be on all the ballots? I don't think so. At least that's what to me, that is what their plan is to keep him off enough ballots that he literally cannot get elected. Because you have to have 270 electoral votes. And if he doesn't have that many ballots in the first place, then he can't win, period.
Yeah, and this is something that would, I think, would go down in history. Imagine having X number of states where your only choice was Biden, the Libertarian, and the Green Party candidate. No Republican candidate on there at all. That would be insane banana republic stuff.
Well, and they have already set the precedent that speech about an election is punishable by indefinite confinement. That precedent has already been set. You don't think they won't use that for people who complain that Trump's not on the ballot? They will continue to use the lawfare. That's the whole point here, is to
Speaking of
turn
third-party
this banana
candidates,
republic.
don't count out Cornel West for making an impact too.
Wait, what?
Cornel West, I think he's green. What is he running under?
I didn't
Independent
know
or
that.
green? I think he was going to be on the Democrat primary, but he went third party. Cornel West, presidential bid. Let's see, third party bid for president. Trying to see where this. Here, let me bring it up here. This is, so you talk about like things like the African American vote. This is a man that can throw things off. I actually respect his a lot of he is CRT based in his opinions, but he is very reasonable about how he applies it. And so I actually respect, I don't agree with him on a whole lot of things, but I respect the way he goes about it. He's very, very, very intelligent. And I'm seeing it just says third party. It's not telling me. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. But you talk about someone that could take, if he takes, what is the African American vote, about 10% of voters, 14% of the population, but about 10% of voters.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah, if he takes about 3% of that, I mean, that's the difference right there in the last 6 elections in a row. It could be a Ross Perot effect, but for the minority vote instead of the libertarian vote.
All right. Well, that's all I got for that. And I got to get back to work. Did you have
Yeah.
any other?
No, by the way, this is the 200th episode
Ooh,
of Social Distillation. So it's a special
fancy.
one. We went a little long on one candidate, but it was yeah, it had a lot of direction, and I think that was very helpful. So we were able to
Yeah.
stay on task. But yeah, anything else before we go? We gave no medical advice, no anything, and vote how you feel. Please be informed because we all depend on it. Uh,
Yeah, go and there are no shortage of resources now where you can hear the actual candidate and if you can't find them in a long form format, are they worth your vote? If they can't sit down for an hour,
there's
hour and a
only
half,
one candidate that hasn't done that yet, and
where
he's the
yep,
one sitting in the office right now.
yep, yep. So if you can't find an hour, hour and a half with one interviewer as someone who will ask follow-up questions, because that is where that's why Rogan is so popular because he doesn't just let you answer. He'll say, "Well, wait a minute, but get specific. How does that like even for someone who he likes and agrees with, like Bet David will go off on these long answers and Rogan will come back. Well, no, wait, specifically, how does that tie to ESG? I may agree with everything you just said, but I
Mm-hmm.
want an answer to this question. So let's get back to it and focus in here. Give me an example. How does this and that's why he's popular, but also why so many of certain types of people stay away from him. They don't want the follow-up question. They
Mm-hmm.
don't want to get Zuckerberg where Rogan just kind of rope-a-doped him into walking face first into a wall and saying, "Oh yeah, we totally interfered with the election and censored all this stuff." Oh.
All
So
right.
go find the person you like or the one you dislike speaking for themselves in long format and see what you think about them after that.
Yeah, I mean, even Marianne Williamson. So I went to her website and I was like, oh, she's kind of a little bit woke. But then I went ahead and watched her hour-long interview on Breaking Points, and I was like, okay, so she's pretty much like she was on her website. But without those two data points, I would have been just going with a little bit of information. And it's
Mhm.
like, okay, I heard her out. She's a smart person. She's got potential, but her policies would not be something I agree with. Perfectly respectable way to say, no, I'm not going to vote for her.
Mhm.
It, the headline about Trump and very fine people, well, that's not a good reason to vote against him. You actually have to listen to him talk. And I went back to the 80s with interviews from him
Yeah.
to see how I was going to go. And, in 2016, I didn't go that direction because of his interviews in the 80s and 90s, because I was like, well, he's kind of new here, but let's see what his record is. And, it is what it is, but it's at least information to go by. But yeah, we encourage you to do that. You can put it on 2.5 speed or whatever. Listen to him like a chipmunk and at least get the information.
All right. Well, we'll see y'all next time for more Wheel of Timeness.
Yes, we are on part 2 of Winter's Heart, and I didn't read the comments because we apologize for the technical errors. We have a little bit of an echo there, but we were trying something new.
All right. Well, it's back to the same old tomorrow. We'll see y'all then.
All right, later.